Ever wondered how a building goes from blueprint to reality and the risks involved?
It varies a little bit, but essentially a building owner or investment group or whatever, they're going to buy the land and get their permits and stuff like that. And the architect designs the building, like as far as the way it's going to look. And then we're just contractors to the architects, essentially. So, because, buildings need to hold up. And just because it looks really cool in the drawing doesn't mean it's going to stand up.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what we do is make sure that what the architect envisions and would like to see is going to hold up. And there's a liability to that. See, this once again, like where how does a CIO fail? How does a company fail? You cannot be a limited liability company, be a structural engineering firm. It's not
Okay.
allowed.
Okay.
You're not allowed to vacate liability.
Okay.
So when you stamp a drawing, you're an engineer of record, and that's permanent. So if that building falls down, you're gonna be involved in
Be some
way, shape, or form.
repercussions, right?
Yeah, I mean, you either prove that it wasn't you and it was something else, or yeah, there could be some serious issues for you. So like part of what I do is making sure that I have all the data in perpetuity to defend if anything were to ever happen, because you're not in control of whether or not the contractor actually installed it right, what materials they may or may not have used, whether or not they skimp out on certain things, because that happens. And it's really important that there's certain data that is kept forever. How do you plan for that, right? How do you plan as a CIO to keep this data for possibly 60 years until, or whatever it's going to be, and that's part of one of the things why I'm actually here, because the information is very important, and how that information is handled is very important. So I help them to make sure that it's done correctly.
How often do buildings like fail? So how often do buildings like actually fucking fall down?
Honestly,
Not often, right?
Not without someone being like a contractor.
I mean, what happens is fucking like it happens like.
Well, here's a good example: that crane that fell. Right?
Okay, I remember that a few years ago.
So,
yeah.
that was because they didn't follow the disassembly procedure correctly, right? But the company that was involved with that, I can't remember the structural engineering firm, because a structural engineer has to sign off on a crane footing, right? And they design it. They say this is what's going to be required for you to do the crane. But they have nothing to do with putting the crane in, and they have nothing to do with taking the crane out. But when that crane fell, it was nothing but bad PR for everyone involved. But it came down to, when they go to the courts to figure this out, well, the engineers defended themselves, proved that they did their job correctly. And then it was proved that they disassembled that. They took off a bolt in the wrong order, and they made it fall, right? So that's that kind of stuff that can happen, and it does. But a building just falling down, not so much. Some things, though, good example, hometown, Lubbock, let's bring it back to Texas. There was a Taco Bell there that, when it was designed, they didn't account for the freakish, weird snowfalls we get every now in like 40, 50 years, where it'll dump 4 or 5 feet overnight.
Yep.
And I tell people it's weird.
I think it's cold as fucking Lubbock.
Yeah. And so it doesn't happen every now and then, and people don't design for it. And so there's this old Taco Bell building where it snowed, and it just compacted the ice, and it got too heavy for the roof, and it collapsed with people in it and killed them.
Oh shit.
So those kinds of things will happen when weather data isn't taken into account. Or, right now Seattle has got issue for seismic retrofit, so it's called unreinforced masonry. There's a new pretty much law / policy that they pay. There's over 1,000 buildings that are above 6 stories tall that are old masonry buildings here in Seattle that will not withstand a certain level earthquake.
So when if someone builds a building, right? Engineers go in, they do all the tests, do all the kind of stuff. But does something come in, like a city of Seattle or city of whatever state come in and say, like, do like a final check, like this is built correctly?
So you do permitting reviews. So the engineers will we do our calcs. We call them calcs. And essentially, you figure out a lot of what we do. Two big things is gravity load and lateral load. So how much mass is there? How much does everything weigh? And then what forces are going to be acting on it? So if the wind is blowing on the wall, it's going to want to create a force that's rotating on the wood, right? So the bigger the wall is, the bigger of a diaphragm, it becomes a big kite, right? And so now you've got wind has got a lot of pressure, it's a fluid, right? And if you don't design it right, well, it's going to want to fall over. So the International Building Code standards, they figured all this out for people. They figure out material strengths, they figure out designs, and the engineers then compare their designs to those standards. And then you would send it off to the city for permit review and stuff like that. And the city of Seattle has like a structural engineer that works for them, and they'll review all of your stuff. And if they have a problem with anything, they'll be like, no, fix this, I don't like this, whatever it is. And then they'll say, yep, this is good to go. You know, now they'll start building the building. And then after the building's being built, there's a construction administration process where you'll have back and forth with vendors, because now you designed it to be done one way, but maybe there's new material, new concrete, new rebar, or they want to change something, want to use a different bracket. So then you'll be involved with that. But we come up with the design. We're not designing. We come up with the information that supports the design to say that this will not fall down from an earthquake. This will not get blown over. This can handle, so like all the beams, wooden beams, they're all designed to burn for 4 hours before you'll have a structural failure in wooden structures. So things like that, like the engineers will account for, you know, we need this to last for 4 hours if it's on fire before it has a failure. So you get that all put together, send it off to the city reviews it, and they'll say yes or no. Some places are more lax than others. It could be up to the engineer that you're working with at the city. But yeah, the city is involved with these things.
How bureaucratic is to build a building here in Seattle?
Extremely.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it was a bad enough thing that they just passed that new law that allows contractors to move forward if you're not compliant. If you're fighting affordable care or affordable housing or high density housing, the contractor can not require the city to approve.
Okay.
So you need all the calcs to say that it's safe, but you know more like, oh, we're gonna get a vote. So what happens here a lot, this happens a lot. They'll vote to get the money for the building. Does people vote for it? They say yes. The city goes, all right. People said yes. They're okay with it. The company goes, all right. Now we're gonna start designing it. You put in the design work. You do all that stuff. You get it designed. They spend money on this, right? It could cost them, you know, it could cost them $300,000 just in the design. It's still not being built. Then the building, they're gonna have another vote to actually start the construction. And that's when people say, not in my neighborhood. Happens all the time. So there are buildings that get designed and never get built. They already had the money earmarked for it. They had all the stuff going for it. They had the design happen for it. But when it comes to, you know, breaking ground, the community votes and says, I don't want to look at it. And
You can't so that can be like overvoted. Like you can't. So neighborhood, like you can't say, okay, neighborhood, I hear your vote, but your vote don't count. We're gonna build it anyway.
Pretty much, they kind of were going with that, and so that's why they passed that new law that said if a city doesn't meet the current requirements, so there's like I don't know what they are off the top of my head, but there's a ratio that you have to have of high density, low income, that kind of stuff like that. And if you don't have those at all, if someone comes in or already owns land, maybe they already own a building, and they go, all right, I'm gonna bulldoze this, and I'm gonna put a 6-story or 5-story tall apartment building here with 2 levels of concrete parking. The city can't tell them no.
So what's in this project Atlas Design is working on?
We've got a bunch, you know, that we're working on right now. We do a lot of work with Devco. We do a lot of work with Bellwether Housing, City of Tacoma. We got a big project that we're starting in City of Tacoma. A lot of just apartments, but we've got 28 active projects right now as far as being worked on design, different phases of construction. You know, the process starts and it takes years. So yeah, there are buildings that we designed. We did all our calcs and stuff like years ago, and now they're finally being built. And so now we're in a different phase of helping that building get built. which is part of what the engineers do as well. It's not just the calcs at that point. They actually start working with the contractors, and contractors will have questions like, can I cut a hole? Can I cut a hole here, right? And we'll be like, no, we can't do that. Like, you know, if it's post tension or pre-tension concrete and you cut the wrong place, a cable will fly out going to like Mach 1 and kill people. So, you know, like, we're still involved in that, you know, the process